This is An American Workplace, a podcast dedicated to rewatching and discussing NBC's beloved mockumentary series, The Office. My name is Katie White, and joining me as always is my good friend and co-host, Chad Hopkins. How are you doing, Chad?
I'm doing all right. It's been a rainy dreary week in Texas recently. It's actually raining still right now. So I've been fighting through that, but I'm glad to be back home. This is my first time recording with you in a couple of weeks or at home in a couple of weeks, because last week even I was at my parents' house. And so it feels like haven't done this in a while, but anyways, it's just nice to be comfortable in my own place. How are you?
I'm well. I got to spend 2 nights in the country out of New York. It was nice. Went to a friend's house in Pennsylvania. She lives about an hour outside of Philly, and just got to go over there for the weekend and do nothing and eat good food, drink good wine, hang out. It was very needed.
Get anywhere near Scranton by any chance?
I don't think so. I don't know Pennsylvania geography really well, but I do have a friend that's from Scranton that I went to school with up here in New York, which is kind of funny. But he's not an Office fan, so
Right.
he doesn't count, of course.
I've been playing Song Pop off and on for a year or so, mostly against random people. And there's this guy I play who's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, according to his Song Pop page, at least. And I keep wanting to mention it, but I get the feeling that people from Scranton hear enough about it. So I kind of want to leave them alone about it.
It's kind of their one claim to fame. Well, we have some new reviews. Again, lots of growth this week in numbers, so thank you all very much. If you're listening for the first time, hello, welcome. We have some new reviews on iTunes from Sparkling Eyes 04, from B. Castle, and from S. Riker, I think is how you say it. Thank you all very much for your reviews. We also have some Facebook ratings and reviews from Chris Fisher and David J. McCorder, and a rating from Amanda Henderson. So thank you all very much for finding us on Facebook and rating. We really appreciate it.
Yes, very big help. Thank you so much for all of that. And I just want to mention, because this is cool, S. Rykar left us a review on the Indian iTunes store. So not our first international review, but it's always cool when those pop up. So thank you to everybody who listens and leaves us that feedback. Now, something that we just posted today's as in Wednesday, so yesterday as of when you're listening to this, we have put together a survey that we would love for you to pay attention to and fill out for us, because it is us trying to find ways to expand this show. And that includes bonus content. So whether that is access to our notes before we record, and Katie and I both take a lot of notes, so you'd be able to sort of see our thoughts before we actually sit down and talk to each other. And then possibly a call-in voicemail line that allows you to call into the podcast, and we could potentially play those on the show in some sort of listener segment. And that would be a lot of fun. Or live stream us recording. If you want to stay awake with our erratic recording schedule, you're welcome to do that as a possibility. Or even just bonus episodes of some form. We wouldn't know what those would include just yet, but that's a possibility. And so these are all things we're exploring, and this would be behind a sort of monthly subscription service called Patreon, where you would be able to determine how much you would like to give us per month. And there would probably be different tiers, like a $1 level, $2 level, etc., where you would have different access to different content based on your subscription. And just to be clear, nothing about the normal show that you're listening to right now that it comes out every week would change. It would be the exact same thing. There would just be more for people who are interested in paying for more. So always going to be free, but if you want to shell out a little bit extra money and help us out, make this a little bit more worth our while. Not that it's not worth our while at all, because we both have a blast doing this, but it'd just be a little bit extra incentive for us, and it would help us to do more things for you. So please go over to iTunes, go over to Twitter or Facebook, or if you check the show notes in your podcast player, there should be a link in that as well, where you can find that survey. And if you fill that out, it'd be a big help.
We're also possibly thinking about some merchandise for the show, shirts, mugs, stickers, stuff like that. So also click the link, fill out the survey, share your thoughts on that. Um, we would love to, hypothetically one day come across some listener in an American Workplace T-shirt. I mean, that would be pretty cool. So let us know if you're interested in that through the same link as well.
Yeah, for sure. And should be noted, I already have stickers made for us. I've got like 49 of them because I have one of them on my laptop. So I'd love to hand some of those out. We'll see what happens. Just go to the survey, let us know, and we'll see where we progress. Now, before we move on to our episode discussion, we are on to disc 2 of season 4. And so there was one special feature on disc 1 I wanted to mention, which is a short 24-second video of Steve Carell talking about rabies, which is a reference to Fun Run, the premiere. And it's just him being ridiculous for 24 seconds. And I think that the standout quote is when he dejectedly says, 1,000 Americans die every 4,000 years to rabies. So he's upped those numbers to make it sound significant. But you have to realize that America has only been around for about 250 years going on. And 1,000 people every 4,000 years is, I mean, I would say nothing to sneeze at. That is definitely something you can sneeze at. that is not significant at all. So it's just a funny short little snippet. It was probably some sort of commercial or promo for the show before it premiered. And it's probably on YouTube if you wanted to go try and find it. But on to our discussion. We're talking about episode 4, which is titled Money.
Money aired on October 18th, 2007. Was both written and directed by Paul Lieberstein, and this was Paul's first time directing the show.
Michael and Jan are still living together following her being fired from Dunder Mifflin, and things are not going well because she is spending all of his money at a very rapid rate. Over the course of the episode, we learn that Michael has taken on a second job as a diet pills salesman or telemarketer, whatever you want to call him, and he's actually had to take a couple of advances on his paychecks as well. So as he tries to figure out what to do with his mounting debt, Dwight is still trying to face the fact that he and Angela are no longer together. To cope with his alone time, he's turned Schrute Farms into a quaint agro-tourism venture. He's not so keen on calling it a bed and breakfast. It's agro-tourism. So Jim and Pam decide to spend the night together at Schrute Farm to see what life is really like where Dwight and his cousin Mose live.
Yeah, it's not our first foray into Schrute Farms, but it's our lengthiest so far. We've gotten to see quite a lot of it in this episode, and I love that. I love Mose so much. I think I mentioned. So anytime I get to see Mose is a good episode.
And Mose is definitely like the high point of this episode, because we were talking before we hit the record button, Katie. This is actually a pretty depressing episode. There are definitely its standout moments that make you laugh, but we've got multiple characters who are just miserable.
I think it's a really well-balanced episode. There's a lot of depressing stuff, you're right, between Michael and his financial troubles and his relationship troubles, and Dwight and his relationship troubles with Angela. We see him sobbing in the stairwell at one point. We will definitely get to that in a minute. But it's really well-balanced with a lot of good comedy, too. So, yeah, one of my favorites, I think.
Just starting off with Michael, it opens with him, well, aside from the cold open, which we'll talk about, it opens with him and Jan talking about, curtain color choices, because Jan would like to sort of reupholster his entire condo. She's already bought new carpet. They're wanting to buy a new sofa. They're getting new curtains. And Michael says, what does it cost? And Jen responds with, it costs what it costs. And Michael rightly calls her out, saying that doesn't make sense. It doesn't, because it doesn't justify buying what you can't afford. It's like people who go and buy something extravagant because it's on sale, because you're saving a lot of money. Well, newsflash, people, you're not saving money if you're spending money.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, if I needed a new pair of jeans and I had to buy a new pair of jeans anyway, Sure, I'll buy the ones on sale because in that case, yes, I would be saving money buying something that I needed to buy. She did not need to reupholster his entire apartment. They did not need all of this new stuff. But to Jan, she's just got to do it. It's a bargain. And again, it's not her money to spend.
Mm-mm.
She is not working. They are not married. They presumably do not share a bank account. Although I don't know, maybe they do. She certainly has access to his finances and is going through them rapidly.
We don't actually have an answer to that in this episode. At I think it's Oscar who at some point asks, "What about Jan? Doesn't she have money?" Michael says, "We don't talk about her money." So I would assume that Jan does have her own finances and would be capable of supporting herself somewhat, but is instead using Michael's account to fund her extravagant desires and trying to show off with these cosmetics. Basically, is what it amounts to: is cosmetics, things that are just for looks. And she's just generally taking over his life. She's demanding use of the car when he needs it for improv, he says, or it's actually for a second job, as we find out. It actually kind of pissed me off when she told him, "You need it for improv, right? Well, just pretend you have a car. That's good practice for when you have to pretend you have a car." I was actually like momentarily livid. I was like, "Are you kidding me? That is not cool, Jan." And it turns out later she didn't even need it for anything. Oof. I get heated about that.
And of course, it's absolutely heartbreaking when we learn that Michael is putting on this act and saying everything's fine, I'm just going to improv, when in fact he is heading to his second job. So I think he says later in the episode he's working from 5 to 1 a.m.
Yeah.
So Dunder Mifflin 9 to 5, then 5 to 1. That doesn't leave a whole lot of Michael time. And it's just so sad that he has to cover up all of his trouble financially from Jan when she's the cause of his financial trouble and go work another job. And he didn't even get the car to go to his second job. It's just really, it's sad.
And the camera crew first follows him. We see him catching a ride on a bus over to his second job. And as the camera walks into his office space and walks up to his cramped little cubicle that is his own little space, and he looks at the camera and, oh snap, they found me. And he unenthusiastically tries to convince the camera crew that he got this job because he just loves sales and doesn't get to sell enough as a manager. And he says, I count it as a hobby. Some people have golf or relaxing, and he just sort of trails off. It's sad. And then to add another cherry on top of this whole messy ice cream platter that Jan has created of his life, she shows up to pick him up in the car, which is a Porsche, by the way, because they consolidated the vehicles to save money, but then they got a Porsche, whatever. And she says, "I've had too much wine, you drive." So after working 9 to 5, then 5:30 to 1 at two different jobs, he doesn't even have she doesn't have the courtesy to drive him home, instead forcing him to do it himself.
Right, because she's been drinking. It's just, it's really upsetting. Not a good light for Jan at all. And Michael does not enjoy this job. We see a bit during the episode and even more during the deleted scenes where he's just not enjoying himself. However, what's kind of cool about Michael in this job is that we know Michael at Dunder Mifflin. We know he is kind of lame to the people at Dunder Mifflin. He's not funny. He's not liked particularly. But at this call center, he's really liked. He's cool. People think he's funny. They ask him to hang out quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why he's so different at this job. I think it's because he's just frankly exhausted and doesn't have the time or the energy to put on his, acts. But people really like him, and he doesn't see it at all, which is, again, really heartbreaking. He doesn't see that people really like him.
It's another display of his people skills, and that's sort of his downfall at this job. Aside from it taking all of his free time, he wants it to be an outlet for his people skills, and he is supposed to stick to a script to sell these pills that presumably don't work. But he ends up trying to talk to these people and have conversations with them and get to know them and make the sell that way, rather than tricking them through a script and moving on to the next one and tricking them through a script and moving on to the next one. And it it's not his strength, obviously. That he gets chastised for it by his new boss, Mr. Figaro, and still I think he is seen in a different light by his coworkers because he's not the manager. So it almost makes me wonder what he was like at Dunder Mifflin before he became boss, you know?
Yeah, I wonder if he was that people pleasing, joke making guy. I want to say he was. I mean, we've seen um, evidence of him as a child being just he was going to turn out this way. Let's put
Right.
it that way. Um, but I don't know if being a boss is what made him the Michael we know. I'm not sure.
I would I would argue that Michael probably still is the same way he was as an employee at Dunder Mifflin. It's just like I said, being put in a position of authority puts a different expectation on you. It makes people view you through a different lens, and it makes certain things not okay that might have been okay before. And so what where Michael I don't want to say failure, through Michael's failure as a boss, but not failure, just to be clear. I think he is adequate when he needs to be. But his failure is that he tries to be the person that everybody likes when really that's not what you want in a boss necessarily. That can come along with the package. You can be a likable boss, but as a boss, you have to get work done. And he's not always adept at doing that. And even at this new job, he's not adept at doing that. And this new job does affect his work at Dunder Mifflin because he's out so late, doesn't have any free time, gets to bed presumably a lot later than he normally would have. I mean, I think 1 a.m. and I mean, both of us are well used to seeing 1 a.m. And in fact, it's past 1
I'm
a.m. for you right now.
Yeah, I'm 20 minutes past. So
And I'll be there by the time we're done here. But Michael's clearly not used to it, and he's tired, and it affects his work. Ryan asked him to prepare a PowerPoint presentation because apparently he wants the employees of Dunder Mifflin to use PowerPoint for some reason. I mean, I guess I can't question it too much because Oscar does use it for non-work related reasons in this episode. But I don't know. It just seems like a weird software to require everybody to be familiar with in a paper sales company. But I won't question it. Michael doesn't prepare is the bottom line because he's too tired and doesn't have the time to do so.
and it definitely affects him, as you said. It is obvious that he has never even opened up PowerPoint. As Ryan collects everyone in the conference room to do this presentation, um, Michael, first of all, kind of struggles to find PowerPoint on his computer. And then it opens and says, "Welcome, new user." And Michael is so committed to keeping this presentation going in his sleep deprived state that he just, great, so this will take some time to set up. And, he's just going to drag them along through the whole setting up of a program. But Ryan calls him out pretty immediately and says, "You know what? No, you didn't prepare." Michael says, "Well, sorry, I was working late at my other job." Which Ryan says, "Quit the job or you're fired here." It's really simple.
Mm-hmm. Michael has this quote says, "It would have been nice to have done well with the first presentation Ryan gave me, but do you know what else would have been nice? Winning the lottery." Because there's definitely a comparison between those two things. But anyways, he quits his job. It really pains him. He doesn't like being a quitter, I don't think, especially in this instance, because he does like sales and he does like people and he was liked by his coworkers, but he just couldn't get it to work the way he wanted it to. So he quits, and we find out that he's been taking advances on his salary too. He asks Oscar for another advance. So I don't know if that means he's like 2 months ahead of his salary schedule and he's not going to get his next paycheck for another 3 months. I don't know. But it really shows the desperation uh, at this point in his life. And he even goes to Kevin, who we know has a history of gambling. We saw him in Poker Night, being pretty good at poker. And then there was that episode where him and the whole office were making bets on things together. And so Michael says, do you know of any sure things that are guaranteed to help me double my money and then double my money again? Kevin points him to the mob. Not that he can point him to any specific person in the mob, but man, Michael's desperate.
He enlists Oscar, or probably rather Oscar volunteers his services to help Michael kind of sort out his financial trouble and maybe find some workarounds, consolidate his debt, try to just make the best of the situation so he's not totally devastated. And who was it? Creed. It was Creed that said Michael should probably declare bankruptcy. We learn that Creed, what he does when he gets into financial trouble is sends his debt to a William Charles Schneider, and Mr. Schneider takes it over from there. So Creed, I guess, is debt-free. But he convinces Michael to declare bankruptcy. So Michael does exactly that. He bursts through the door and screams, "I declare bankruptcy," which is one of my favorite moments of the early seasons of The Office, honestly. That gets me every time. And there are many a GIF out there. Oscar pulls him aside and says, that's not actually going to do anything. That doesn't mean anything. But as I said, sits him down and tries to make some kind of fix for the situation.
Yeah, he puts everything into a PowerPoint presentation and shows Michael, well, this is the stuff that this is the money you're spending on essentials. This is the money you're spending on non-essentials. And this is the money that you're spending on stuff that nobody on God's green earth needs anything to do with. And so they call Jan up and try to explain the situation. And Michael has Oscar try and soft nose it a little bit, say, yeah, Michael did some fancy finagling and was able to cut it in half. But the way it actually comes out is through some fancy money trickery, Michael is in severe debt. Oscar skips a step in there somewhere, but Michael gives him the thumbs up. Jan, straight away, well, what happened, Michael? What happened to your money? How could you have done this? I can't believe you've been so irresponsible. And so really not great feelings towards Jan from the two of us while watching tonight, because she's accepting no blame for this. And really this whole episode has been another exercise in Jan's selfish tendencies, from using Michael's money to hogging the car for no reason to making Michael drive himself home at 1 a.m., blaming him for his money problems. And then when she shows up after Michael has had enough and just runs away to the train yard, the train yard, she shows up in the parking lot to find Oscar and just tosses her keys at him like he's some sort of valet. And I don't know if that's her. I don't know what to take from that, whether it's a racist act or a classism act. I mean, I don't know. But in any case, it's extremely rude. She just tosses him her keys and then runs away to find Michael. So, yeah, we're not big Jan fans in this episode, but she does end on a somewhat redemptive note.
She finds Michael at the train yard and at first kind of grates on him some more, says, well, where are you going to go, Michael? Your debt follows you everywhere electronically. Like, you're not going to escape this. But she ends up saying, you know what? When the company laid me off, my family and friends all kind of abandoned me, but you were there. You stuck by my side, so I'm going to do the same thing for you because you're someone worth sticking beside. And so she hops on the train with him which is stationary. But she says, so where is this train taking us? Which is pretty awesome. I do not like Jan in this episode, or at all, a lot of times. But this was one of the first times, if not the first time, that we have seen her really stick up for Michael for something real. And this is sort of a do or die Bonnie and Clyde, like, if you're going down, I'm going down too, because you stuck it out with me. So, okay, a rough episode for her, but she kind of brings it back.
It is a genuine moment, and I hope for the best, but I can't help but have that little like thorn in my side telling me she doesn't mean it. She is just winning Michael over for the moment so that he continues his hospitality towards her, and things aren't always going to be this sugar sweet. So we'll see what happens, but that just based on Jan's tendencies that we've seen so far, I don't have the utmost faith in her loyalty, I suppose, is a way to say it.
A lot of Michael stuff this episode, but it was a big Michael episode.
Yeah.
But we have some other people to talk about. We have, let's talk about Dwight, because he's got a big arc in this episode.
It's officially official that him and Angela are separated. It happened like 2 episodes ago. And then last episode we said it's official now. And now this episode it's even more official because he has taken the stuff that she left behind at his place and brought it back to her. And to sort of occupy his free time now that it's not being spent with Angela, he's begun this bed and breakfast agro-tourism venture at Schrute Farms, and Jim and Pam decide to take him up on it and go through the motions and enjoy themselves exploring what Dwight's home life is like and what Mo's is like and all that kind of stuff. But what Dwight puts on as a face is quickly wiped away during that trip because they start to see how tormented he really is.
In the middle of the night, Jim and Pam wake up to this moaning, crying sound, and Pam says, "Your turn," because she had previously woken up to the sound of a slamming door, which was Mo's in the outhouse. So this time was Jim's turn to go find out what the odd noise was. And he tracks it down to Dwight's room, where Dwight is just sobbing, crying. Jim knocks and goes in and just doesn't say anything to Dwight, but kind of wants Dwight to know, okay, I'm here. I know what you're doing. I know what you're going through. It's one of their couple of nice moments this episode, but Dwight is not in a good place.
It's heart-wrenching because it's not like he's moaning in his sleep. This is him so tormented in his waking hours that he is literally sitting alone moaning with his loneliness. And to top it off, he is holding this little porcelain cherub that Angela claimed to have left behind earlier in the episode when they were exchanging the stuff that she left behind. She said, "Well, I'm missing this." And he says, "Well, that's not there." Well, we see it's definitely there. He held on to it as a sort of keepsake. And now he's holding it, cherishing it as he sobs because she's gone. So it's really terrible to see how affected he is by their breakup. And no matter what he tries to cover it up with his bed and breakfast, with building tables, with his job, whatever it might be, he's very tormented. And later we see him playing Bon Jovi's "You Give Love a Bad Name" on the recorder by the dumpster outside the office building. And then we start to see Andy continuing to pursue Angela, which leads to him just sort of leaving Dunder Mifflin. He just walks out, goes to the stairwell, and resumes his sobbing that he had done the night before.
Jim and Pam made eye contact in that moment, and Pam sort of telepathically uh, urged Jim to go chat with Dwight because they've been kind of keeping tabs on him. I mean, that's what their whole visit to the Schrute Farms was about. Essentially, I think, was to help Dwight get over Angela.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jim decides to go meet Dwight in a stairwell. And it's this really intimate, quiet scene where Jim talks about why he left Scranton originally, when he left to go work at Stamford. And that was Pam. And he says, I wouldn't wish my heartache on anyone, on my worst enemy, and on you. I would not wish that on anyone because I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was just distraught. And he kind of lets Dwight cry it out a little bit, and then he gets up and leaves, and Dwight reaches over, presumably to hug Jim, and Jim's gone. Just a really, really nice scene.
It's a moment of solidarity from Jim, and I think that this is a potential huge turn in their relationship because so far between Pam and Dwight, we've had a couple of sweet moments. Notably, there was the injury when Dwight suffered the concussion, and he was really sweet to Pam. But they had a couple moments since then, like I think it's Diwali when Pam was crying over Jim not being present, and Dwight assumes she's going through menstruation and is not in a good mood because of that, but he nonetheless comforts her. So we've seen those tender moments, but so far between him and Jim, it's been pretty antagonistic nonstop. And there have been lighter moments of that. There have been heavier moments, but this is the first one where it's just been like Jim, Dwight, finding solidarity together, going through heartache, or at least sharing their heartache together. And like you said, Dwight does reach out to try and hug Jim or thank Jim or whatever it may be. Jim has already gone back to show his affection to Pam. But even though Dwight returns to more of his former self as soon as he returns back to his desk, I think that this is an indicator that things might be at least a little bit different between him and Jim, maybe a little bit less antagonistic. And it's worth noting that when he returns to his desk and takes his ruler and clears the space over his desk between him and Jim, he did the exact same thing in the pilot episode. So this is really the showrunners, the writers telling us Dwight is back to himself.
I would see that big smile on Pam's face, like, we did it. He's back.
Mm-hmm.
He's returned. You alluded to Jim showing his affection for Pam. After he leaves the stairwell with Dwight, he walks right up to the office, walks straight up to Pam. Pam is talking about, hey, what are you thinking about dinner tonight? And Jim just doesn't even say anything. He just goes and gives her a big kiss on the mouth. And Pam is just giggly nearly. I mean, she's just, what are you doing? We're in the middle of the office. Like, they've never been very obtrusive, never really PDA in the office. But Jim just can't help it. He just is so in love with her at that moment. Oops, let it slip, I guess. Because they're talking. After that, he says, oh yeah, dinner. I was thinking we'd try that Italian place. Then Pam has a talking head and says, yeah, I guess Jim's just really passionate about Italian food. Jim says, yeah, I'm very passionate about Italian food. In fact, I'm in love with Italian food. Of course, not talking about food, but about Pam.
Of course.
Just so sweet. Of course. And it's, yeah, so they are, I mean, obviously they're in love. Hi, it's been 4 seasons and we've all been rooting for them since day one. Obviously.
Yeah,
but,
obviously.
Yay.
Yeah, Jim, I think living through his heartache in season 2, or season 3, when he left Scranton and went to Stamford, and then coming back, living through that with Dwight, I think it just really made him appreciate what he has now and how things have changed for the better. And so he is overcome and goes and kisses Pam. And they point out in the commentary, Jenna Fisher says, this is their first public kiss. They had their like little pecks on the cheek in the break room or something, but they are in the middle of the office at the front of the room right at reception desk, and he plants one on her. And so it's very public, and it says a lot about how they're progressing.
A couple more things, I guess, about Dwight, Angela, Andy triad there. I didn't think about this, and it may have been totally obvious, but I didn't think about the cat that Andy gives Angela is garbage. The cat
Yeah.
that Dwight gave Angela that she rejected. And he said he found it outside of Vance refrigeration and gave her this gray tabby cat, and that's garbage. And I just had to hit myself on the head because obviously. So that was pretty funny. But this time, Angela accepts the cat. Angela, after that, says that Andy can ask her out to dinner and that would be all right. So that kind of spurs Dwight's whole demise there.
Regarding Garbage the cat, I wrote that in my notes for the first time. I don't know if I'd ever noticed that before either, but I put it in my notes with question marks. I was like, is this a thing? And then they confirmed it in the commentary. And so I was like, yes, that is Garbage. And it's so like devastating to Dwight that Andy just regifts the same exact cat with success this time. I can only imagine how that feels in Dwight's shoes, especially when he was in love with this lady and she just completely rejects the cat at first, and now she's accepting the cat from somebody else. That's tough, but that is a neat little throwback because Andy did find Garbage outside of Vance refrigeration, which is where Dwight dumped the cat after Angela turned it down. So there's that situation. There is Kelly, who is dating Daryl now, probably almost definitely just to make Ryan jealous. When Ryan comes to visit in the conference room during the PowerPoint presentation, you have Kelly kissing Daryl before he leaves. And she says, "I'll see you later, babe." And he just says, "I got plans," and just leaves. He's not very interested in Kelly's revenge dating or whatever you want to call it. And in fact, later, Kelly tries to get Daryl to choose between her or his daughter. Obviously, he chooses his daughter. Kelly is all kinds of crazy, and Daryl tells her so.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of person would think that a person would choose a very, very new girlfriend over a daughter, or really any girlfriend over a daughter. So that was, well, very Kelly. That's kind of what we expect. So
yeah,
it holds.
Daryl says, "You need to access your own crazy side."
I love this quote from Kelly. She says, "Daryl Philbin is the most complicated man I've ever met. He says exactly what's on their mind. What kind of game is that?"
Right. That's so
She's
good.
just so used to playing her own little mind games that the idea that someone would just say what they're thinking is just completely baffling.
And speaking of Ryan, just want to mention he greets the office with a very enthusiastic, "How's my favorite branch?" And nobody returns as enthusiastic because nobody cares. Nobody likes him, including Michael, really, at this point. And there's also that small moment after Daryl has kissed Kelly and she's said, "See him later." And he says, "I've already got plans." He's making his way out. And Ryan is clearly just trying to sort of like stand tall. This doesn't bother me. I've moved on. Kelly and I aren't a thing anymore. And the closer Daryl gets, the more Ryan sort of deflates until eventually he breaks eye contact and sort of brushes his shoulder like, "Yeah, no big deal, whatever." It's like he's trying to be a man against Daryl being a man, and he loses.
On to funny moments?
Yeah, let's do it.
I guess we should tackle the cold open first. Michael has been watching some movies. He has, oh gosh, what is it, a Netflix subscription?
Yeah, it's Netflix.
Yeah. And has been watching some new movies and walks in first shot of the episode and throws his coat just onto Pam's face. His coat, throws it at her. And through some of his quoting, Pam has kind of deduced that he's watching The Devil Wears Prada and says things like, "Get me Armani." And Pam says, "Like a suit?" He goes, "No, on the phone. Armani on the phone." And so she's just realizing that, oh, good, he's channeling Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. Um, Finishes the movie, says, I am so sorry if I was inappropriate or mean to you. Turns out Meryl Streep was the bad guy all along. I had no idea. She goes, great. And then the next day, presumably, comes in and says, how's it going, McCushla, or something like that. And it takes Pam a minute, but he's watching $1 Million Baby, and she says he's going to try to kill me.
Yeah. That's the real comedy about it, I think, is that he's watching these at work in the slow moments, according to him. So he's only watching them in pieces, and so he doesn't get the full story until 3 or 4 sittings in, and so it means that he gets attached to characters who maybe he shouldn't be attached to. I like how in the beginning, after the theme song, when he's picking colors with Jan, he says, well, this one matches my eyes and this one matches your eyes. And people tell me that I have pretty eyes and I haven't heard the same thing about yours. So we should pick the one that match mine. She's sort of astounded for just a second before she moves on. But it's just a funny thing. Like, Michael, you're her boyfriend. You need to tell her that she has pretty eyes and go with it that way.
It's like, could have had a great opportunity there to be flattering, but didn't take it. In the call center, Michael's new boss calls for what is essentially a conference room meeting. And Michael whispers to the camera how useless these managers' meetings are. Of course, this is a parallel to his office, where everyone thinks his meetings are useless. So he's just completely oblivious to the parallel there and how he's just not exactly liked either.
Once he is forced to quit at this telemarketing place, he does the sort of Judd Nelson Breakfast Club fist pump as he exits. Nobody's paying him any attention, but he has to put it down to open the door, and then once the door's open, he puts it back up like people are still paying attention to him, and it's really just the camera crew, which really means not really anybody's paying attention. It's just a funny moment for us, the audience. And he says the same thing during a voiceover. He says, but the good thing about the American dream is that you can just go to sleep and try it all again the next night. Not exactly how that works, but I appreciate your enthusiasm and optimism, Michael.
As always. In the Schrute family, apparently when a man sleeps with a woman, he is left a bag of wild oats on his doorstep by his parents, which is creepy, to do with what he pleases. And now that Angela and Dwight are broken up, Dwight can now sow his wild oats. Because, as he says, do whatever you want with them. They're your oats. I don't care.
Yeah, so you can make bread or whatever.
Oatmeal. They're your oats. I don't care. So he's going to go sow his oats.
Yeah, I love that there's that literal Schrute family definition of the phrase, which really, I looked it up to be sure. It's typically used for someone who is going and sleeping around with people. So not exactly the exact parallel, but again, it's just funny that there's a sort of a Schrutism along with that.
It's closer than I thought, I gotta say. I didn't think it'd have to do with sex at all. So there you go.
Pam has an all-star moment as they're first arriving at Schrute Farms, where they're making beat/farm/motel puns. She first says the Beats Motel, paralleling the Bates Motel from Psycho. And then she has a couple more where she says Embassy Beats and the Radish Inn. And Jim just says, how are you doing this? Because she's just spewing these out. It's a great moment where Pam gets to sort of one-up Jim.
Michael is making his phone calls at the call center and unknowingly calls Stanley Hudson. Ooh. And tries to cover it up with different voices. Stanley is thinking that Michael is just playing a joke and just being inappropriate and calling after work hours, but Michael is on his work hours and tries to cover it up, which only gives him away further. He goes, Senor, are you happy with your long-distance service? Which, again, isn't he selling diet pills? It seems like
yeah.
His calls kind of bounce back and forth as to what they're actually selling, but Stanley is not very pleased.
He tries a couple of different accents. He tries that one. He tries Are you happy with your cable or satellite subscription or something like that? Stanley says, I know your voice, Michael. And I think we get our very first talking head that is not an actual talking head. Not, I mean, somebody out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but we get the camera zoomed in on the phone, and Stanley's on speakerphone, and he talks about how the last thing he wants when he's at home in his sweats drinking red wine is to hear from his boss, Michael Scott. And so that it's a unique take on a talking head because it's not actually him present.
Michael insults the heck out of Vikram, who is the top salesman at the call center. Vikram was a surgeon in his home country, and Michael assumes that medical school cost, in his words, $40 or a donkey or something. And then goes on to say that he would have been chief of surgery. Pretty insulting to the guy who, was a high-level professional in his last life, essentially, and then moved here and now makes calls for a living. But I'm better than that. I would have been your chief. I would have been your boss. It's just, ugh.
Yeah.
Not the time, Michael.
Yeah, thankfully Vikram is pretty level-headed and doesn't level, and he sort of responds to that because really it doesn't deserve one. Dwight makes what I took as a joke, but when I think about it, I'm not really sure if Dwight intended it as a joke. He says, and as of this morning, we are completely wireless here in Shroot Farms. But as soon as I find out where Mose hit all the wires, we'll get that power back on. I want to assume that Dwight was smart enough to actually like make that attempt at humor, and I thought it was really funny. But part of me wants to say, no, Dwight was being serious. Mose stole the wires because it's something that Mose would do, and they'll try and get it back soon, but it's not there right now. So I don't know. Either way, it's really funny.
I'm trying to remember the nighttime scenes there at Shroot Farms, and I think everything was lit by like oil lamp, so it could have been that they didn't have any electricity.
It's possible for sure.
Speaking of the Shroot Farms, Dwight reads Jim and Pam Harry Potter to go to sleep because Jim requested a bedtime story. Even though when he first asked, Dwight said he would not, but sure enough, they're reading Deathly Hallows, I think, right?
Goblet of Fire. It's the beginning chapter.
Goblet of Fire. Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I really thought that was funny too, because Dwight's really into it, and Mose is sitting there sort of curled up on Jim and Pam's the foot of their bed, and he's staring at them, and he's wearing Jurassic Park pajamas or a Jurassic Park shirt or something. Mose is still very much a child, I think.
He's like rocking back and forth creepily, like really wanting to be a part of this situation. It's very uncomfortable.
Speaking of Mose, I'm as we mentioned, we both really like him. Noted, he is portrayed by Michael Schur, who is one of the show's writers and directors, and we talked about The Good Place a few episodes back because we both really like that show, and he's the creator and showrunner for that one as well. It's not
and
nice.
And Parks and Rec.
Oh yeah, and Parks and Rec.
Should be noted.
Yeah, that's good point as well. But the first time he appears in this episode is as Jim and Pam are arriving at the farm, and he is running with like his arms stiff at his side, and he's just sprinting along, and he looks over and he smiles, and he crosses the road behind them, and he's just running across the field, just unannounced. Oh, look, there's Mose. Okay, interesting. I just think that's so funny.
Maybe the last one for me, since this is just such a big episode. Michael tries to convince the office once they hear that he's been having money problems, that he doesn't have money problems, by taking a $1 bill out of his pocket, crumpling it up and putting it back in his pocket. A few things here. It's a $1 bill, so you could spare it. Crumpling it does nothing, and you put it back in your pocket. So 3 strikes against you. We don't believe you. You are broke.
And they tell a funny story about that scene in the commentary. It was originally in the script that Michael actually does rip it up, which still there's some comedy there because it's a $1 bill. It's nothing in the long run. But then they found out that that's actually a federal crime, defacing or ripping up money. So they couldn't do that. And so they had him just crumple it instead. And it ended up being sort of a backdoor reference or homage to the British Office, because apparently there was a scene in that where David Brent, played by Ricky Gervais, talks about how it's illegal to tear up money. So weird back and forth there, but it's a fun little coincidence and interesting story behind why that scene is the way it is.
Any more for you in that?
Just a couple of small things. There are a lot of, we talk a lot about classic Office moments, and there are a few of those. There was Michael's "I declare bankruptcy." There's later in the episode where he climbs on the train and says, "I'm running away from my responsibilities, and it feels good." And it's that picture with the scowl on his face as he just sits on the train, thinking he's running away from it all. There's Jim asking Dwight, "You okay?" As he walks in the office in the morning, and Dwight responds, "I am better than you have ever been or ever will be." There's that one. There's Andy talking to Pam, saying, or trying to get her to hook him up with Angela. And she says, "Well, I don't really think you'd be a good match." And because she's trying to save Dwight's feelings. And he responds, "Well, maybe you should look in the smart part of your brain." I would think that's a pretty well-known Andy quote as well. And I think that's all of the real classic ones that stand out to me. But I just want to point out, lastly, the whole whoever versus whomever argument that takes place in the conference room.
Oh, yeah.
Because, well, one, we find out again in the commentary that Paul Lieberstein, who wrote and directed, really fought to include that scene, to keep that scene in the final cut, because he just thought it was funny, I suppose. But Ryan uses the word whomever. Michael tells him that that's not the right word. It should be whoever, because whomever is never actually right. Creed says it's a word that was invented to trick students. Okay. Andy says, no, it's just the formal version of the word. Either one's correct. So far, everybody's wrong, by the way.
Right.
Even Oscar, who is the resident smart guy, doesn't know when to use which. And Michael sort of snarkily adds to the camera, "Oh, it's because it's his second language." Yeah.
Right.
But I would assume that Oscar learned English as a child. Kevin says he knows, but he's sort of throwing a tantrum because nobody showed up to support his band, which, by the way, is Scrantonicity 2, because he left the original Scrantonicity. Then finally, Pam gives the correct usage. They debate on how Ryan used it and what item in his sentence was the object. Kelly says, "Ryan treated me like an object." And then Toby finally gives the final once and for all confirmation that yes, Ryan used it correctly. And Michael responds, "Nobody asked you anything ever." So it's a lengthy discussion for something that ultimately doesn't mean anything. But man, isn't that what The Office is? Is those moments that wouldn't belong in any other show, but just feel so at home here? It's a great scene for that reason.
That's one of those scenes that most of my friends who have seen The Office adore The Office. But the very few that don't like The Office, that's why. It's those scenes. It's that stuff that I love. But they're like, it's just painful and it's about nothing. And I'm like, yes, exactly. It's great.
That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty. And they hate it. But that's kind of the divisive style right there, is you love it or you hate it.
Now, what about deleted scenes?
A few for me. At the beginning when we see Michael in his office with Jan picking out the curtain samples, there's a scene right before that was taken out where Jan has arrived at the office and Michael is just stalling on time. He does not want to talk to her at all. She goes into his office and he is just trying to find someone to talk to so he can kill some time and not go talk to her.
Yeah, he's asking, who is Andy, Stanley, and Phyllis, about who wrote Shakespeare. Well, Shakespeare is a person.
Well, Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare.
Yeah. So that's a funny moment, but yeah, it's him actively trying to avoid spending time with Jan. we actually get talking heads in the deleted scenes from Mr. Figaro, who is the diet pill salesman boss, and from Vikram. Mr. Figaro talks about how, yeah, we don't pay these guys much, but they're reading from a script. So, and then Vikram says, yeah, I'm pretty much the only one who's not lazy. So yeah, we get talking heads from both of them, which I always like when we have these sort of one-off episodes that take place in other places, and we get talking heads from those people. Like back in the Dundies in season 2, we got a talking head from the Chili's manager, or I'm trying to think of other examples, but I just love when we visit other places and those one-off characters get to say 1 or 2 lines in a talking head, and then we never see from them again. I think that's awesome.
At the call center, Michael is trying to sell his diet pills on his cold calls, and that's not going well. So then he tries to sell Dunder Mifflin paper. Turns out that client is already a Dunder Mifflin customer, and is kind of looking for a way out anyway. So Michael's sort of failing on both fronts.
At the agro-tourism venue, Shroot Farms, that morning, breakfast ends up just being an enormous pile of bacon, courtesy of Mose. I just love it's nothing else. There's no eggs or hash browns or omelets or pancakes or anything. It's just, here, have a big heaping pile of bacon. Which, I mean, I wouldn't complain.
They each get like 10 or 15 strips. It's insane.
I wouldn't complain at all, but it is funny.
At one point, Michael apparently was told in his life that he needed to be putting his money into CDs, or certificates of deposit. He misunderstood and bought many, many, many compact disc CDs. Yikes. So he, for whatever reason, thought that was a good financial investment and bought CDs of bands he didn't even like because he thought it would be a good financial tactic.
There's a somewhat disheartening deleted scene where Dwight is in Michael's office and he says, I'm discombobulated and I need help. And Michael just sort of shoos him away. So it's just another weight on Dwight's shoulders that the man in this office the only person in this office that he would turn to for help sort of shoos him away and not shuns him, but ignores his problems in favor of his own. So that's sad.
And speaking of sad, Michael asks Phyllis how Bob is doing financially, because they apparently haven't chatted in about a year since Phyllis's wedding. And she says, yeah, he does pretty well for himself. And Michael ends up asking Phyllis for money, which, yeah, you don't ask anybody if you can help it for money, and you definitely don't ask your subordinates in your office. But he's in a tough spot.
And lastly, for me, we get a snippet of Mose on a trampoline while Dwight is building a table and Jim and Pam are onlooking. And Mose is jumping up and down saying random things, presumably like moves, but he's just doing the same 2 jumps where he lands on his knees, he lands on his butt, he lands on his knees, he lands on his butts. But then he says like helicopter, cannonball, and he's saying all these random things. And Jim, Pam, look at me, look what I'm doing, watch me. And he doesn't think they're watching, so he stops, and Dwight says, you really should be watching. I mean, he's really trying hard for you. And Mose says, well, I'll just stop if they're not going to watch. And Jim says, did we or did we not pay for a show? And so Mose continues on, and Dwight continues building his table. It's just a lighthearted sort of ending to these deleted scenes.
As we mentioned earlier, we do have a commentary for this episode. It's our first of season 4. A few things on that. Pam, or rather Jenna Fisher, jokes that Pam has had a purchase order on her desk that they put there, I think, in season 2. Mm-hmm. And she's been working on it all the time. Apparently a very complicated purchase order that she just cannot get to add up. Just one piece of prop that she's been playing with for 2 months, or 2 seasons.
Yeah, she's holding it at the beginning in the cold open, and then she's holding those same papers she claims at the end when Jim kisses her. Um, I love that Melora Hardin or Jan, while the theme song is playing, says, "Man, that is just like all the classic theme songs of the past, and that's gonna last for years." And I just have to think, man, is she right? I mean, we even borrow their
Yeah.
theme song for the podcast, so uh, it sure has stood the test of time. 10 years later, or whatever.
The At the end of the episode, Jim and Pam talk about their TripAdvisor review for Schrute Farms bed and breakfast, as it were, and they actually kind of talked to TripAdvisor. They made sure that this was allowed and put up a listing for Schrute Farms on TripAdvisor, and had a couple of reviews, a couple that the show did, and then some fan ones even as well.
They John Krasinski actually pulled a prank on Jenna. She was saying when they were filming the drive up to Schrute Farms, he turned on her seat heater without telling her. And so here she was in the middle of the California heat, sweating and just feeling all hot and begging to have the AC blown on her in between takes because John Krasinski snuck the seat heater on. And it was just a fun behind the scenes sort of thing where, yeah, even when they're not on camera, they're pranking each other in some ways.
In this episode, Angela Kinsey, who plays Angela Martin, was actually pregnant and was not showing yet. And then at the time of the commentary, Angela had had her baby just 2 days prior. So from now until, I don't know, assuming she was about 3 or 4 months pregnant at this time, definitely all through season 4 and possibly some of season 5, she will be pregnant, which is something to watch out for if they start putting things in front of her stomach.
Right. And they actually mentioned like a mail cart or something that they moved away from Jim's desk over to Angela to hide a pregnancy bump. So we'll have to look out for that. Jenna mentioned that they shot all of the Schrute Farm scenes in one long day, like a 14-hour shooting day or something like that, which is crazy. Sounds exhausting to me, but it also sounds like a lot of fun with Michael Schur and Rainn Wilson and John Krasinski and Jenna Fischer all together. It sounds like a good time, but man, I'd be tired. And speaking of the Schrute Farms, Dwight also, they told us that Dwight's room had actually sort of been tripped out. They had a giant plasma screen TV in there and a bookshelf with lots of books and other things we can't see. So Dwight's room was fully outfitted, and Greg Daniels, the showrunner, they said they'd never seen him laugh as hard as he did when during the table read he found out that there was going to be a scene with Mose sitting in the outhouse with the door banging open. He apparently thought that was really, really funny, and everybody else thought that was really, really funny.
We've seen Pam look a little bit different this season. Her hair specifically, she's been curling her hair, which is not the interesting thing, but there's a new rule for Jenna and the hair and makeup team that it still has to look like Pam took no more than 30 minutes to get ready in the morning, because she just wouldn't have done that. So even though she's got this like new and improved look going on, it's still the same low maintenance, easygoing Pam that we know, which is kind of cool that they thought about what would the character really do here.
I love stuff like that. You know, we talked about before, it was revealed that they had hired an art student or somebody to draw Pam's artwork, and they picked it because it looked like artwork that Pam would draw. Or they revealed that Jenna listens to a playlist of songs that she thought Pam would listen to get into character. So little stuff like that help to inform the characters and the actors within those roles. I love that kind of stuff. I think that's really cool.
Jenna commented that at Schrute Farms, Jim and Pam actually pushed the twin beds together in the hotel room, a little scandal. there were two twin beds on opposite sides of the room, and when they opened the door to leave, they had been pushed together. And they do mention that this is their first night away together, so this is a pretty significant little trip inside of town. But cool for them that they get to, this is their first outing as a couple.
Yeah, I don't know if I noticed that when looking through the crack in the door, so I'm glad it was pointed out that they had pushed their beds together. Um, they also mentioned that they had decided when writing this episode that they wanted more out of Oscar. As a character who is smart and rational, he pairs very nicely with Michael, who is very much not smart or rational. So I like including him a little bit more.
I think that's it for me.
Okay, one more from me. Melora Hardin just told a brief story. She said, somebody actually recognized my voice over the phone the other day because we hear my voice over the phone so often in the show. So I thought that was a fun little tidbit.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I have the discussion topic this episode. In Michael fashion, who spends too much money on things that he does not need, we see Oscar's chart there of his spending on essentials, his spending on things that he doesn't need, and there's a bar for spending on things that nobody ever would need. What is something that you spend too much money on? Maybe something that you don't need or that no one needs.
In my defense, I haven't done this in a while, but a couple years ago, I retaught myself a new way to solve the Rubik's Cube so I could be faster. And in the year or so that followed, I purchased many Rubik's Cubes because something that may not be known to people not in the cubing community, I want to place myself firmly in the area of dorkdom, the cubing community.
Completed.
There are different like makes and models of Rubik's Cubes, like made by Chinese markets and companies that some of them turn better than others. Some of them are faster than others. And all these variations that you really wouldn't expect from something that you would expect to be just a simple kid's toy. But it's true. There's very many makes and models, just like sports cars even. And so I have probably in excess of 30 to 35 Rubik's Cubes, and all of them are different in their own ways. And so for a long time, I was spending way too much money probably on 3x3 Rubik's Cubes and even the 4x4 or 5x5, whatever other variations. And like I said, I haven't done that in a while. I haven't like shelled out a whole lot of money, but for a while, every time a holiday would pop up and these cubing websites would have sales, I would spend more than I should.
Can you solve them all?
Yeah, I can. Oh, well, I mean, most of them, like I said, are the 3x3 Rubik's Cubes, and I can actually solve one pretty consistently in about 25 seconds, and my fastest time is 15 seconds. So,
well, okay.
yeah, it was my hobby for a long. I mean,
Sheesh.
it still is a hobby, but for a long time when I was more or less unemployed as just a substitute teacher, that's what I spent a lot of my free time doing. Is I'd put on Netflix and I would just watch TV or whatever it might have been, or a movie, while solving the Rubik's Cube over and over and over again. And so, yeah, that's mine.
I don't have anything quite as fun as that, honestly. I just spend way too much money on Amazon.
Oh, I know that struggle too.
Oh, my roommate laughs at me because she's like, all right, you have another package. What is it? And I'm like, I don't know because I have so many packages in transit from Amazon right now. It's gotten to the point where if I'm not planning on going to the store, like the grocery store is one thing, but like if I need, Swiffer pads or something like for my floor for dusting or something, and I'm not going to go to a store that has them, I just like buy it on Amazon. It's really bad. It's a problem. But Prime is free shipping and I just can't resist it. And it's an addiction and I need to stop.
Yeah, Amazon Prime is awesome because you can get stuff sometimes the same day, and that's really addicting.
Yeah. Ooh.
It's like, ooh, this is not unreasonably priced, and I could get it in 2 hours. So yeah,
without
I'll buy
leaving.
this.
I'll just like have a fleeting thought of, oh, my desk is cluttered. Let's find a tool that will, help me organize my desk, and I'll just go on Amazon and just buy it. I'm like, okay, well, that happened very quickly. It's just, it's a whole struggle.
Like I said, I know that struggle all too well.
Well, that is the end of our 32nd episode of An American Workplace. You can contact us at facebook.com/workplacepod or at workplacepod on Twitter. You can rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, and you can email feedback and ideas if you would like to workplacepod@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at KTLady623 or at facebook.com/katie.white.
The best place for me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is CHADADADA. And also facebook.com/chad.hopkins. And don't forget my other show, Cinescope, where we talk about the movies we love and why we love them.
Show notes and contact information can be found at workplacepodcast.com. That's all for this week. Thank you for joining us to watch one of our favorite shows, The Office, here on episode 32 of An American Workplace. Make sure to join us in episode 33 for our discussion on the next 2 episodes of season 4, Local Ad and Branch Wars. Bye!